Okay, so I think we are officially live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, or if you're watching this on replay, thanks for tuning in as well. I'm here with Victoria, owner of Divorce Analytics. She can tell you more about herself. Me personally, I'm Kara. I am a marriage and divorce coach. Got my start as a divorce attorney working at different law firms in Chicago for over 6 years, and then transitioned to coaching almost 3 years ago now. And today we're going to be talking about strategies for negotiating and mediating in the context of divorce, specifically focusing on your values and how those play into the negotiation world. So before we dive in, Victoria, why don't you share a little bit about you?
Hi. Well, my name is Victoria Kirilloff. I am a certified divorce financial analyst and a family financial mediator. I became a CDFA after I used math to really lose my hyper abusive partner, who I like to refer to as Voldemort. Now I help people have data-driven divorces so they can really preserve their relationships and resources.
Love that. I love it. It's kind of a nice combination of the emotional side, which is where the values come in, and then, like you said, the data, and combining those together to make those empowering decisions. So let's just dive right in. I mean, I think first just doing a little discussion about values and how they do impact decision making. So from my line of work, um, decisions tend to be emotionally driven, especially in a hyper emotional context like divorce. And so, because your emotions impact the actions you take, it's important to peel back those layers and identify what's really important to you. And that's where values come in. So values is like a buzzword, but it's kind of rare for people to actually do a deep dive on them. And yet they are driving our decision making, like on a daily basis, how we spend our time, who we surround ourselves with, how we treat other people, because there are these just little internal things within our soul that like drive us to action. So there are lots of different values that I kind of jotted down beforehand that I think could come up in the divorce related context. But I think first and foremost is just identifying that connection between emotions and decision making, and sort of the goal is to try to take back some of that power, your own power, and not let the emotions take you for the ride. But before I go any further, I want to get Victoria's thoughts on this.
Well, I think it's really important for people to remember that divorce is really the biggest business decision of your life. And it's super easy to get the phases of divorce kind of conflated. And really, when you break it down, there's the emotional and social side that you're best served by working with a coach like Kara to help you show up as your best self. Because by the time you get to the financial and legal phase, if the emotions are driving your decision making, not only are you going to end up with a less than stellar divorce experience, it's going to cost you a lot more. But most importantly, if you have a co-parenting relationship, chances are you're not going to be using the divorce experience as a way to actually improve your communication strategies. Instead, you'll try to snipe at each other, or oftentimes people will try to punish the other person. And instead, you have to work with a coach to get your emotions under control. So then by the time you show up to the financial phase, you can really have your best self. Now, I think you lose about 20 IQ points, studies have shown, when you go through a major change like a divorce. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's pretty shocking, actually.
News to me.
Makes a lot of sense, though, for us. Yeah. I started to not understand why some of the decisions I was just making, I just needed to get them done. I totally just wanted to check that off my to-do list and move on to the next thing. But in actuality, that decision intermittently played a very strong role with my follow-up decision and my to-do list. And so even though I was feeling good emotionally, I was creating more problems for myself down the road.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I mean, divorce impacts every facet of your life. It's a huge transition, and all transitions can be difficult, even the most amicable ones. And so, making sure that you are working with people who are objective, who are not being personally impacted by this divorce, who can really give you that sound feedback and be a sounding board for you before you actually put those decisions out into the world, and even just reality test them. Like, how does this align with, what are your values first and foremost, and how would this align with your values from a practical perspective? How would this play out? So I'm going to rattle off a list of values that I think could come into play when negotiating. And if you don't get on top of these and learn how to regulate your emotions, if an aspect of the negotiations like hits one of these trigger points, it can really send you down the wrong path. And so I think there's some in here that can resonate with everybody, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on these, Victoria. So the ones that I identified that could pop up in divorce are values of independence and freedom, compassion, family, flexibility, respect, conservative versus risk taker, security and stability, trust and honesty, and wealth and abundance. And the reason I picked those is because they all sort of relate to how you want to live your life. And when you're getting divorced, how you want to live your life is related to what the ultimate outcome of your divorce is going to look like and the decisions that you're going to be making. So Victoria, what are your thoughts? And if you have other values you would add to the list, what would you include?
I think sometimes negative values or negative triggers can be very important to kind of be aware of as well. Mm-hmm. For the most part, when you get to the financial phase of divorce, you're building out your global settlement proposal. So there's going to generally be pretty hot button issues. For example, spousal support, right? That's a huge topic. But then also child support and other child-related costs that are not covered by the support agreement. And so if you're not aware of some of those underlying negative values that we have kind of grown inadvertently along the way through the relationships, I think those can also be a value for us to take a step back and look at. And so when it comes to addressing, I think, spousal support, it's really important to meet both parties' needs. And so I think if you can work through some of those negative emotions with your coach, right? Especially if you're going to be the payer of support, figuring out maybe why does it feel so bad? Yeah. But then maybe figuring out a different way. So if you can do a lump sum payout amount as opposed to a monthly payment, that's going to help you stay in alignment with your values, because every month, if you have to cut that check, it might be that opportunity to grow a little bit more resentment. And even if you are on board with paying, it's just having that ongoing monthly payment can just seem like a sort of Damocles over a lot of people's head. Mm-hmm. So if you're able to align with that value and you want to pay, but you just don't want to be doing a monthly payment, figure out a better way to develop your property division proposal then. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when you're figuring out both parties' needs, you have a really good opportunity to keep things in the realm of reasonability. And I think that's where our values have to really kind of also be examined. If you are, oftentimes I deal with two people that have completely no idea what their lifestyle costs. There's that division of labor within the household. The men generally are writing the bills and the women are taking care of the human assets. And both of them, they just don't understand all of the operations actually that go on behind the scenes. So if you can look through that financial lens and actually, I know it sucks, but build out a documentation-based budget. You can use a budgeting app like Tiller or Rocket Money to kind of help you gather that historical information. But when you are really understanding the total lifestyle transition cost, then both parties are able to understand that if there's not enough money, we're going to have to take a step back and look through the lens of reasonability. So we can use this divorce as a transition period and live authentically. If we're not able to live authentically together, then really the divorce process should be used to figure out the best way to move forward and not drop down to punishing the other person for whatever happened in the relationship.
Yeah, those are both really great examples. I love the focus on what are the underlying interests or needs, which relates back to the values, right? So the example you gave about somebody who's going to be required to pay spousal support and having to do that monthly payment, right? When
Mhm.
when we honor our values, we feel good. We feel authentic. We feel like we're being ourselves. When we don't honor our values, that's when you experience those negative emotions like that resentment. So, for example, if somebody paying spousal support really values um, freedom or certainty, perhaps paying that lump sum up front, being done, cutting ties, knowing this is my maximum payment I'm always going to make. So you've got the certainty, you've got the freedom, right? You can see how that would better fit their needs. And so that's really like a lot of times, even when we have all of the numbers and the numbers don't lie, the numbers are what they are, people still get stuck because of the what's underneath, right? We understand what the numbers are, but we're not willing to accept them, or we're not willing to budge from our current position because there's something under the surface there's a need that's not being met. And so I think those are both really great examples about that issue. I also want to talk a little bit about like where we get our values, because you mentioned this idea of like the negative values, which is so true. So there are really like two types of values. There is fear-based, which is we're trying to avoid something from happening. And there is conscious based. So it's something we are consciously choosing because it resonates with us, and that would be seen as like more positive. So like I can give an example of a value that fits both, right? So for example, a hard work ethic. It could be fear-based because you're worried what happens if I'm not constantly like working around the clock and being perfect, like the fear of what could happen if I don't have a hard work ethic. And it could be a conscious choice of I want to make a difference in the world. And I know to do that, I need to really put my head down and work hard, right? So it's important to not only identify the values, but also explore where they come from, because it's not like we're born with a set of values and we're stuck with those for the rest of our lives. Like they're evolving, they're changing. Some, we usually pick them up from our family of origin and how we grow up. And then we go out into the world as adults and they may shift, and some may stay the same, some may go away. But yeah, a lot of times that is like the obstacle. And once somebody feels like they have been heard and understood, it like lets the steam out of the boiling teapot, and you can actually start to see more movement on the settlement side. I'm curious to know like how you've seen this come up, because I know you do financial mediation, which I think is so cool. I'm curious to know like your experience from the mediator side, like how it's come up for you.
Well, oftentimes during the marriage, things are said, and essentially there's enough that changes the perspective of the other person, or you develop, I would say, the marital financial narrative of, somebody has always said, well, this is my money, it's not ours, or whatever that underlying or that common saying has been. And so then when you are going through the divorce process, there's what was said to kind of get one over in the marriage, and then what that person actually wants in the long run. And I see this often manifest with a house, right? where
Mm.
one person, they really thought they were going to fight for the house, or the other person thinks that they want the house. In actuality, they were looking more for stability, and that was represented in staying in the marital home. And so, you're able, when you actually ask more questions and drill down, to figure out the requests, or the reason behind the request, and the values that are driving that. So in this situation, the woman was really interested in staying in the marital house because it represented a lot of stability, and that's where her kids had come, and she could not picture living life in another place. It wasn't that she was necessarily opposed to moving out. She just didn't have another point of reference. And so unfortunately, the situation was that they weren't going to have enough money for her to stay in the house post-divorce. So we were able to kind of drill down and figure out what she was really looking for to create another semblance of stability in her post-divorce life. So we were able then to really help the couple navigate the financial constraints, but also stay true to their values.
Mm. That's that's like a perfect example of you could insert any asset. The house is a great example to use, but you could put any asset in that example. And sometimes you have to take a step back and think, like, why am I fighting so hard for this particular thing? Like, am I fighting just to win, or is this something that is symbolic of an underlying value or need that I feel like is not being met? And if so, are there other ways to meet that need? Because like you said, oftentimes the house can be a really emotional asset to negotiate about, because it does represent all of those values, like family and like you said, stability. And so really, like, looking under the hood of the car and exploring what's driving this, like what's behind all of this. And once you are clear on that, what are the other options or solutions that might be available? And like you said, it's not that other options don't exist. It's just almost that they haven't been imagined. They haven't seen that there's another way. And so a lot of times that's how I work with my clients, where it's about identifying, well, what is possible, and then where do you want to go from there, right? What are all the possibilities that would meet this need other than this house? And just giving them the space to really expand their view of their situation. I feel like I had a follow-up question and now it's evading me. Oh, I know now. So another important thing that I think we wanted to touch on was also how to actually communicate about these things in negotiations, like actually sharing this with your spouse in a way that is effective for purposes of negotiations, but also ensures that everybody is heard. So, like, just initial thoughts on that, and then we can sort of go from there.
Well, I think the most important thing that everybody has to figure out are what your financial realities are of the situation, because that is going to really help shape what is possible. And oftentimes, I think negotiation has the most probability of getting derailed when one person isn't really aware of all of the financial variables. And when you are looking things through a financial lens, you're then kind of able to not let the emotions drive everything, right? And I think it's really important, as you are building out your issues for resolution, you go through and figure out not only, what you would be able to get if everything was right and you got everything you wanted, but also like a compromise, and then all your bottom dollar, right? What is the least amount that you're willing to walk away from the table with? When you have those three different areas of analysis, you really understand just what you have to negotiate with. Because at the end of the day, divorce is all about creating a win-win outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get the other person to agree to the settlement. And as long as they are reasonable and in line, you should try to work with them to figure out how you can create those wins. I never see settlements that are completely one-sided, end up that way. There's always the revision process. And if you are trying to really streamline this, and keep in mind, divorce is a process of operations. If you get one operation out of order, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Or consequently, if you have to go do the same operation multiple times, that's also going to add to your bottom dollar and make it more costly. So if you have all of the different variables addressed, if you know that your spouse is looking to create stability, they might not want the marital house, but they do want some type of housing security. Figuring out what their needs are for their post-divorce separation lifestyle, right? Being reasonable and in line with what you can afford and what your new income picture is going to look like. So when you are actually aware of both parties' needs and wants and values, you're really able to streamline the negotiation phase, because this doesn't have to be miserable. I mean, it's only really when you don't understand the other person's values and you are blindly, advocating for only, your side to win. That's when you end up with these $100,000 divorces that are going nowhere quick. Nobody wants that.
Yeah. This really is, like you said, about creating that win-win. And you can't do that without the combination of identifying your values and then applying them to the facts of your case, right? And keeping those expectations realistic. Never not going into it thinking you're going to get absolutely everything you want, because then that's not a win-win, right? So you gotta keep that in mind. So things that come up for me on the communication side. So often things that can come up related to the values or just related to the negotiations and mediation in general. One thing that can really drive a wedge is disentangling and this idea of intent versus impact. So oftentimes if one party feels like they've been disrespected, it's important to give space to talk about those things. One example you raised, Victoria, was this idea of that traditional married couple where husband is the primary financial provider and wife is taking care of the home and the kids, and neither of them really know the extent of what the other is navigating on a day-to-day basis, the emotions and the stress and all of that. And so it's important to stay curious and not automatically assume just because we're getting divorced that the other person has bad intent or only my perspective or my story has to be accepted, because the truth is we all have our unique way of interpreting the world. So we're never going to get to an interpretation that everybody agrees upon. And that's where a lot of people, I think, get tripped up, is trying to prove that their story is the right one and that they're on the right side here. But that's not what it's about. And when you're so focused on that black and white thinking, that's where you can go down that path of just getting really stuck in your positions, because then that's when the emotions come in. Then you start to feel defensive and you start to feel like you're not being heard. So those are things that come up for me, which is this idea of intent versus impact. Another thing that I learned during mediation training was this idea of attack the problem, not the other person, which kind of goes to your point, Victoria, about how can we work together to make this a win-win for both of us and come up with a solution where everybody feels like their needs are being honored. So yeah, those are sort of the things that come up for me in that context. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say, in my experience, most people have one or two items that are they feel like they need to get a good settlement. And if you are able to kind of identify through asking questions, as you said, staying curious, right? You can really figure out what each person wants. And I think there's that old analogy of the orange that is often given in collaborative law, where you're working, you have two kids, right? They're arguing over an orange, And, on first glance, it looks like, the best division would be to cut it in half. Well, if you actually take a step back and you ask questions, you find that the girl would like the orange peel to make potpourri with, and the guy would like the orange fruit to make fruit leather, or whatever it is, right? So when you can actually stay curious and use this as a continued experience to get to know the other person on a different level, as opposed to punish them, you can really, it sounds corny, but this can truly be a healing process. It doesn't have to be a miserable event that continues what didn't work during the marriage, but by identifying your values and really understanding what the other person needs, you can really have a meaningful divorce that is in alignment with your greater goals.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a great point. I feel like it does not have to be this. Oh, my pets are going crazy. My apologies. Yeah, this idea of staying curious, meeting each other's needs, and like at the end of the day, just remember you got married because you loved each other. And so how can we try to bring that same level of love and respect to this situation right now? So yeah, I feel like that's a really good way to summarize like the way you just put it.
Absolutely. Divorce doesn't have to suck. Well, I think it's so important that people know that there are modern methods of divorce where you're not putting the attorney at the center of the process. And don't get me wrong, they definitely have a role to play, but there's so many other elements that you need to address by making sure you have your emotions and social obligations navigated properly. You can then move into the financial phase and build out two reasonable proposals, making sure each person is taken care of. So then by the time you get to negotiate, maybe you actually have done it all along the way as you've built out, your financial model. So then you just have to use the attorney to file the paperwork. There are great ways for you to really view this as a better way to get to know your co-parent. And when you prioritize the kids, right? I think that for a lot of my co-parenting clients, that's the number one thing they're concerned about. What are the kids' needs, and how can we make sure that they either stay in the house or they have enough funds to take care of all of the commitments? I mean, kids these days, it's like they have all of these activities and it's all expensive. So oftentimes there's going to be a lot of things that aren't covered by that child support payment. And each person, generally, they do want to show up for their children. And if you have all of the financial facts in alignment and backing up, what you're asking the other person to pay, you are able to then connect that person's value, as opposed to kind of going through all of the financial conversations in the marriage that you may or may not have had, right? And so really the divorce process should be viewed as a way to come together and to kind of equalize and reset the table, so you don't continue to have misaligned actions in your co-parenting future.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And, I think when you get entrenched in that sort of black and white thinking and not looking at it through the lens of what you just described, and you go through the court process, like if you go through either negotiation or mediation, you're going to get the opportunity to fully share how you feel and be heard. Most importantly, be heard by your spouse. You don't get that opportunity if you go to court. And when you do it through a more collaborative process, you can actually get to the heart of the issues, which is so important because that's what's driving everything.
And not to interrupt you, Kara, but I think it's really important to note that, like, the finances are always like the mechanism in which battles get like fought over, but it's never actually about the money.
Yeah.
So it's like some type of resentment occurred 15 years ago and they have never had the conversation. And so honestly, I think my clients that actually get the courage to have that conversation, they have such a higher quality of divorce experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's often what people forget along the way, is that your divorce can actually be very much so a continuation of your growth and healing, or it can be another traumatic event that you then have to recover from. But when you have that open mindset and you're really looking from a position of why and asking more questions, you are able then to take on a lot bigger challenges with your partner and redefine your relationship and prevent really the co-parenting relationship from being further damaged.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, that's really what this is about, is preserving that relationship and saving money so your kids, you can invest in their future and their college fund instead of paying divorce professionals to communicate for you.
Yeah. And even for people who don't have kids, like, this is a really great experience to, one, learn about your own values, which maybe you've never really thought about. And two, just learn how to problem solve in any type of relationship. Because these types of difficult conversations occur in all kinds of relationships, not just in the divorce context. And so, it's really an opportunity to learn and grow, not just in this divorce process, but like beyond. So, take advantage of it. Like, use this as a learning opportunity. It's really important.
And I think, like, really so much in life it boils down to 3 childhood wounds, really: abandonment, validation, and betrayal. And when you are navigating your world, you show up in this shows up in how your life, or how your relationships are impacted, but with money, but also with the opposite gender. And so when you're aware of this, you can really build out your divorce experience to be a healing experience, so you don't continue to have these feelings of unworthiness pop up. For me, that's what it was always. I was giving my money to everyone else because I didn't feel worthy with it. And so, like, you have to change that viewpoint. Otherwise, you'll wind up with nothing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Such a good point. Yeah. I feel like there are like it all boils down to like a few essential questions, which is like, am I worthy? Am I a good person? Like, yeah, I feel like, I mean, you mentioned abandonment as well, but like, am I worthy and am I a good person? Is the life I'm living representative of who I actually am? So yeah, getting into like the weeds there a little bit for me, but yeah, I think this has been so interesting and hopefully insightful for people who are considering divorce or in divorce, or even just like happily married, but maybe having some communication problems, of really going back to the basics of what's really important to me and how can we find a solution that meets both of our needs. So yeah, Victoria, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think what you said, Kara, is perfect.
And scene. Oh my gosh. Well, as always, Victoria, it was so nice to chat with you. Whoever's out there watching, if you have any follow-up questions for either of us, please don't hesitate to post a comment or send one of us a message. We're happy to help. And I look forward to next time we chat.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.